We've been looking at various ways Microsoft Excel can provide basic database functions and help us expand our use of the WordPress pages on our website. But a word of warning, if you haven't seen the other videos leading up to this one, it might be better to do so first. We're going to skip a lot of stuff we've already dealt with. In the last video, using information we'd got Excel to download from Yahoo's UK financial website, we extended our company share pages and added a search function, giving us pretty good site flexibility. But unless you're a fan of market finance, it was pretty dry stuff. This time we're going to create a mini catalogue of famous old albums, including video soundtrack, images and album details, mainly using our old friend Wikipedia again. We'll keep pretty much to the same format with an Excel worksheet for our data, and a Visual Basic routine to create our files and upload them to our web server. And we'll have another search WordPress page and a main results page. In fact, there'll be little change from the ones we saw in other videos. And here's a quick look at one album page as a taster. As you can see, it's quite detailed. So here's an Excel worksheet we've called Albums. If you saw our video on stock quotes, you'll immediately recognize the layout. As you said, most of the stuff comes from Wikipedia, but the soundtracks come from YouTube, and the images come via Google, and we'll discuss copyright issues later. And here's the Visual Basic code, which is quite short. The main routine album file must be instantly recognizable if you've seen our other videos. Variables for our loop, row and column indexes. And this time we've created another variable, total, specifying how many times round the loop we'll go. And an output string, and that curious string separator S again. As we said before, we're going to create a very simple database called a CSV file, which is made up of lines of data elements separated by commas like this. But as numerical information often has commas denoting thousands, which can confuse things, we've changed this separator to space, comma, space instead. So after selecting our worksheet and our jump-off cell C7 and its row and column properties, our loop starts off and outputCSV begins collecting data, starting with the top line of field headers and adding our separator S in between each data element. The next conditional might be puzzling. Our CSV file has all the data we want except for one thing, the total number of records in our file. As there is a space in the very first entry of our field header row, we'll put it in there. You'll see why this might be useful later. The first item might also be a bit puzzling. Why are we adding the loop counter n? Because we're going to use it as a simple ID for each record in our file, as you can see here. And again, this will become clearer later on. Notice the convert string function, which converts any non-string data into strings. Visual Basic doesn't like data type clashes, so we'll spread these functions liberally around just in case. Also, the end of line character 10 denotes the end of each record in our file. When our loop has gone round 6 times, it ends and our file is ready to output. And we'll call a little subroutine open output we've used several times before to do this. Notice the 2 arguments we send to the routine. The first is the complete file path for the text file we're creating, called Historic Albums. And the second is our output string. And that's that for the main data file. And we've also got a tiny executive routine called exec album uploader, which runs both album file and a routine called FTP Uploader, which we'll use to upload our file to our web server. We developed this in video 7. If we look at our worksheet, you'll see how convenient this little routine is. We've assigned a button to it, and that means whenever we edit anything in our worksheet data, by clicking on the button, the alteration can be sent immediately to our web server, like this example. Here we're adding an HTML paragraph tag to the text in one cell, and then seeing its effect on the web page concerned. As you can see, it's a great help for doing small edits to our text, and can easily be extended to many records at a time. Well, now for our WordPress pages. We've set up 2 pages with permalinks album search for our search page, and historic albums for our results page. And we'll look at the PHP for the search page first. Actually, we can go through this really quickly because it's almost identical to the search page we used in the last video for our company stock quotes. The differences are pretty obvious. We're going to be searching through a different file. We've changed the name of our array, which accepts the data from a successful match to album data. And we've changed our text output string, which we'll use to give more flavor to our search results, combining 3 elements of our array instead of using just one. And that's it for the PHP. If you need more help on this, you'll have to check out the earlier videos. To provide an alternative way to view our albums, we've also added a drop-down menu, which again is just like the others we've used, except for the different action page and the album titles in the options list. We'll look at the historic albums page a little bit more closely, although in fact it's still pretty similar to the others we've made. At the top of the page we put a reference showing each element of our array so we can check to see what the PHP is doing a little easier. Obviously the first line is where the page receives the ID of the record to be looked at. As we explained before, we've used a simple number for this ID because it makes accessing our file much easier. Effectively, the ID is the line number for our record in our text file, which we've now opened in read-only mode. The next lines are important, and we haven't really touched on this subject before. One of the most common and difficult jobs for code is checking, validating, and occasionally sanitizing what arrives for it to process. This can be malicious stuff from people who get a buzz out of doing such things, or just ordinary upstream errors. For instance, there are slight issues with the get method we've used here. As you can see, we've used the function HTML special characters again to protect our input from malicious code inserts. But what about those simple errors? If you look at the address bar of the historic albums page, you'll see the query string shows album equals 1. Change the 1 in the address bar to another number and reload, and you'll see another album page. But if a value higher than our number of records, or less than 1, or just plain gibberish somehow finds its way into our query string, our page will crash, which looks pretty poor. So we use fgets to extract the first line of our file into an array called check, and look at the total number of records we got Excel to put into our header line a few minutes ago, and then use a conditional to see if everything's okay. If it isn't, we just exit the page saying no such record. And now we use a for loop to speed up our search by flipping through the lines of records until we reach the right one. Actually, this is not so important in our case with just 5 records, but could be essential if we had 50,000 records, so we might as well allow for future expansion. Although having a site with 50,000 albums and content would be some heroic undertaking. Having found our record, the explode function now transfers its data to an array we've called album, and we can now close the file. From now on, we're effectively printing out onto the page using our array data together with bits of HTML. The first 2 lines print out the year, album title, and artists. Album 4 is the first paragraph of text to get our page going. The next lines print out the iframe code for our YouTube video link, album 5, and put it in a div container which is floated off to the right. We use this float property to allow the text we're going to add to run around the video area. We've added a margin to the top to push our video down the page a bit, and a property to make the link to play.com we're adding keep over to the right. Then album 6 gives us the tracks and timings for our video soundtrack and will flow around the video area, or would do if the text were long enough. Next we have the album details in album 7. And then we have the 2 images, album 10 and album 11. Again, we put them in divs to float them over to the right with margins to keep them away from one another and the text. The personnel text in album 8 then flows down the left side of both images. Finally, we have the background text, album 9, and the copyright information in album 12. If we're going to do something like this, copyright is an important factor, of course. The concept of fair use applies if we're using copyright material for information and comment, which we are, and are not charging for it, so that should be okay. Attribution, however, is a problem, particularly for images used from the web, and the safe answer is only to use images from people you know or with a Creative Commons license and acknowledge ownership on your page. And here's a look at it all put together. Not quite professional, but not too far away, and definitely a far cry from our first faltering steps. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed these videos and found some of them useful. We'll be looking to develop another series using Excel and Visual Basic in the near future. In the meantime, thanks for watching.